Hi, everyone. Welcome. We're glad that you took some time this evening to be with us. I am Alyssa DeFilippo with Parents Helping Parents. I manage a program called Connections California. We are an online, statewide resource and information hub for transition to adulthood and adult services. So if you wanted to know more about supported decision-making, you are at the right place. And we are very grateful this evening to introduce to our Parents Helping Parents Connections California screen, Eileen Crumb. For a very long time, Eileen has been the ED, the Executive Director of Family Resource Navigators, a nonprofit in Northern California serving families of children with developmental delays, social emotional concerns, and special healthcare needs. She and her multicultural, multilingual peer parent staff support about 3,000 families a year, helping with all disability-related services. Eileen has experience as a special education advocate in private practice and in higher education. She also serves on boards and teaches in special education advocacy programs. So I'd like to turn it over to Eileen, thank her for being here, thank Beatrice Gabriel for interpreting this evening, and thank you all for coming.
Thank you. We have an hour total, correct?
Yes, we do.
Okay. So let me share my screen and get started. And hi, everybody. I'm glad to be here today. Okay, so today we're going to talk about supported decision-making. And in particular, I want to talk about supported decision-making in a really pragmatic way.
So excuse me, Eileen.
Yes, ma'am.
We have give subtitles a try.
Ah, that's interesting. That's not what I have.
It always works in rehearsal.
Yeah, it always does. Do you have it now?
Nope.
Okay, let's try again. I don't know why give subtitles. I don't know why I was advertising for subtitles. Okay, let's try one more time.
There we go. Perfect. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you. So thank you, everybody. And we're here to really talk about this in a very pragmatic way, because a lot of times when I have been to presentations about supported decision-making, they only kind of tell you the theoretical. And I am here speaking as somebody who's been doing a project on this, as well as the parent of someone who has been practicing supporting decision-making for over 12 years. Even before the law that we're going to talk about came into effect. And so I really want to say what's practical, what's pragmatic, how do you use this, and what are the advantages for you and your family? So let's first talk about the idea that, it's very normal for every single one of us to use and need help, especially when making decisions. When I make decisions, I talk to my friends, I talk to my family members, I talk to my husband, I talk to the people I work with. I get ideas, I work through things. I think together with them, and they help me to explain things. They help me figure out what's significant, what's not. They help brainstorm and figure out options and talk about the pros and cons. They provide emotional support for me, and they aid me in communicating our decisions or my decisions to other people, because a lot of times the phone is not my thing, right? And if I have to call somebody, I might say to my husband or my daughter, hey, can you call for me, right? And they laugh and they do it. But all of that is supporting my decision-making process. But because I'm a neurotypical person, my decision-making process and the help I get is never really looked down upon. That's not true for people who are not neurotypical, for people who have disabilities. Often this very natural need for support is weaponized against them. It's used as a reason to say they can't make decisions at all. And so what we usually talk about when we talk about this idea of decisions, this natural range that we all are in, we talk about two kind of ends of a continuum. One end of the continuum is substituting for somebody. I'm going to make decisions for you. That's what we do for most of our young children. We completely make decisions for them. We might do it for our elders. We might do it in certain fields for our partner. And again, substitution is I am making the decision on your behalf, hopefully to your best interest. And then kind of on the other side is just this idea of support, which is what most of us think about as just regular decision making. We're going out there and we're getting people to give us ideas and to give us some help. And most of the time, people think of this continuum not as a continuum, but as a yes or a no. And the yes or the no is conservatorship or not, right? Complete substitution for somebody else is going to a court, asking them to get decision-making authority for an individual because they have a disability and taking over and making those decisions for them. And this is not a critique of people who have gone that route, because for some people, the idea of conservatorship is the right idea for them. What I'm here to talk about is the idea that there are other alternatives. And so there doesn't have to be somebody who's completely independent or completely dependent, but there's lots of places in between. And we can think about supported decision-making as one of those places in between where somebody can get help when they need it or want it. We can also think about things that I'm calling companion documents today: powers of attorney, authorized representative, other areas in which you can represent this person and help them to make their decisions or tell people about their decisions without permanently taking it away with conservatorship. So the difference is in conservatorship, it's a pretty permanent decision, right? People can get out of conservatorship, and that was made very famous by the Britney Spears thing. But the idea of conservatorship is that person is not able or wants to make decisions, right, for themselves, and therefore someone else is going to make it for them. And here, what I'm saying today, and the one idea I hope you take away, is it's not either or, it's a whole spectrum of things that you can choose among. So the supported decision-making is the one that's on the support end, and the conservatorship is the one that is on the substitution end, right? With lots and lots of choices in between. So what are we talking about here today? Not just this in a theoretical idea, but in 2023, a law was passed in California called AB 1663. And AB 1663 allowed people to formally use this idea of supported decision-making. Because again, in the past, when people used something like that, it was often used as a reason for them to go into conservatorship. So instead, the law was passed and said, look, people can get help with who have disabilities and still maintain their independent decision-making power. They can choose people to help them with the decision-making, but they will be the final decision maker. So the difference between supported decision-making and something like a conservatorship is in a conservatorship, I make the choice for the person that is conserved, and I am the final decision maker. I'm trying to do what's best for them, and it might be the right way to do this, but that's the way that system works. In supported decision-making, I am assisting that person in making their own decision. I'm helping them to think through things, and they may choose me to do certain tasks in that decision. But in the end, the decision-making authority still lies with them. So I always like to kind of take a step back, because I think this is one of the places where the law was actually fairly poetic, because it really talks about a lot of things in supported decision-making that should be there. First, it presumes competence. And this is something I often say, and as Alyssa said, I do a lot of training for IEPs. And this is something I often say to parents, especially of young children: presume competence. Let's not assume somebody can't do something until we've tried lots of different ways and it's not working out. And even if it doesn't work out, maybe there's another path, right? That's presuming competence, presuming the ability to do that. And often we don't presume competence on the part of adults with disabilities, right? So the first principle of SEM is presume their competence, presume that they want to and can make decisions on their health, their safety, their welfare, their finances, their social life, right? It encourages participation. A lot of times when you're interacting, when you are a person, neurotypical person who's supporting a person with a disability in decision making, people focus on you, right? I just did my son's IPP today, and I had to keep refocusing on him. Hi everyone. This is a place you would think it wouldn't be a problem, but it was. Hi everyone. Will is the decision maker, not me. So why are you asking me, right? Because all I did was turn and ask him, right? So it encourages that idea that this is what they should be doing. They should choose their supports. They should be informed about and participate in the management of their affairs, right? This support should be voluntary. They should choose who they want, right? And they should choose when and how they want those supports. And it should be individualized, right? Which means that this is an arrangement that somebody makes on their own. This is one of the things that gets to people, though, because SDM is infinitely malleable, right? It can look a million different ways. And as a result, people want something that's more structured, right? They want something that they can show somebody a piece of paper for. And so some people are uncomfortable with SDM because it is so flexible. But it is so flexible because everyone with a disability is different, right? And the things they need are different. And that individualized support, that flexible support, should be available to adults with disabilities to make, communicate, and express preferences in medical and financial. You can also have those powers of attorney in those areas, and we'll talk a little bit about that toward the end. You can have authorized representative forms if you have an adult with SSI. You may be the authorized representative, or you might be the authorized representative for healthcare for an adult with disabilities. Healthcare directives, release of information, and representative payees. Actually, representative payees is the one for SSI. So these are all the different additional things that you can do. So, okay, you may not feel, or you're adults with a disability, or if you're the adult with a disability, you may not feel completely comfortable with SDM, feels too flexible. Well, you can also have some of these different kinds of agreements that give somebody the legal authority to make decisions in your best interest. The difference with all these kind of companion agreements that I just mentioned and a conservatorship is the adult with a disability can end these whenever they want to, right? Which makes a big difference. So in all these things, in everything that's not conservatorship, the difference is the adult with disabilities is the final decision maker. Even when they allow somebody to help them, they can change their mind, and they can change that at any point in time. So how do I get started? If this sounds good to you, if this sounds good or something that you or a family member might want to try, how can you start? And I will say that the project we've been doing, since we've been doing this project supported by the state government, the State Council of Developmental Disabilities, a lot of people have come to us and said, my child has graduated, they're living at home with me, and about 80% of our adults live with home. So just putting it out there, they're living at home with me, and I can't move forward on SSI, or I can't move forward on this, or I can't move forward on that, but I don't feel comfortable, or I can't afford to do conservatorship. Both of those reasons, right? I've heard a lot of. And what they don't understand is SDM is something that can start instantly, right? So someone can say, I'm doing SDM, right? I'm doing supported decision making. And then they can speak for themselves, and that's all it is, right? And this is remarkable because this is how the world is for most of us, right? No one assumes that I can't make a decision when I walk into a doctor's office or a bank. But we do make those assumptions about people with disabilities. But what we usually do is just say, hey, I am practicing supported decision making, and these are the people who are helping me. And that could be a written document. It can be something programmed into a talker. It can be a social story that someone reads to somebody. It can be any way that works for them. But SEM is something that you can start instantly. And the great thing about it for us, when we've been navigating families, is once we've gotten the agreement from the adult with disabilities, then we can help the families get all these other kind of services that they maybe didn't think about doing, because we can get a permission to exchange information. We can get all kinds of other stuff in place so we can do the kind of navigation that they might need to get to services. So it is a really easy thing. You want to start, you start. That's it. If you're in a conservatorship, obviously saying you're doing SDM doesn't negate a conservatorship. However, it can be a path to getting out of a conservatorship, if that is something that you think is right or your family thinks is right for you to do. The other thing that I like is that all communication is valid in SDM. And this happens to be my son. So very handsome boy, young man now. And he's just a talker. And I know that that's something that often there's a process involved in it. It takes longer for him to communicate. People don't always understand because he doesn't always use grammatically correct sentences the way other people do, because that's hard sometimes with a talker. But his communication, whether it be augmentative, whether it be a letterboard, whether it be a picture board, whether it be facial expressions, whatever it is, that communication is seen as valid. And this for me, and which is one of the reasons he's allowed me to use this picture here, is been a really wonderful part of SDM. This idea that, we need to respect his communication. His communication is communication, guys. Even if you doubt it, even if you judge it, even if you whatever, it is communication. And under 1663, you need to respect it. And that was a really important part for him and I, because I know that, for example, when we went to see the doctors or we went to the bank, they would, again, turn to me and say, well, I don't understand. And I'm like, well, let's make some effort, right? Because now the law is on our side. So that's it. That's a helpful thing. As I said, you don't have to have a written agreement for this, which for some people is a good thing, but for others is a bad thing because it makes them feel uncomfortable. So if you want a written agreement, there are lots of written agreements out there. Disability Voices United has one, and they have an SDM book that's available both in English and in Spanish. There is also materials available from the ACU and other places that have written supported decision-making agreements that you can fill in. All it needs to do is be in an easy to understand language. It should include the name of the adult with a disability and the name and the contact information of the supporters, the areas in which the adult with disability requests support from one or more supporters. So, for my son, different people have different jobs, and I have very specific jobs for him. It should include an acknowledgement by the supporters that I'm going to provide information requested by that adult. I'm going to support them in good faith and to the best of my abilities. I'm going to respect their final decision, right? That can be a hard one for our parents, for us parents, when we don't necessarily agree with the decision. But I always say your person is not engaged in independent decision-making if you always agree with them, right? It rarely happens that you always agree, right? There will always be times that you don't agree. And you're not going to coerce or manipulate the adult into making any decision. So there's rules. If you notice, most of the agreement is rules for the supporters, not rules for the adult, right? This can be helpful. It can be notarized. It can be signed by two people. This can be witnessed so that there's, clarity if there's any difficulty or an instance where things, people are questioning things. So that if you want a written piece of paper, this is something that could be helpful for many people. And so what I want to do is kind of go away from the theoretical for a little bit and talk about how do you use this thing, right? How would I do this, or how would I use it, or what does it mean in different environments? And that's what I'm going to talk about for the next few minutes. So the first is, how do I tell people I use SDM? You have that script or your social story, which is I use SDM and I want help from, right? For my son, we have programmed his voice generating device, his talker, to give the message of I use SDM. It's right up in the corner, right? Easy to get to. You can use cards like these to give to people, right? I use supported decision making. That's it, right? You can put the names of your supporters in there. And I believe, I'm just going to move my own little thing. Yeah, I have a little thing there. This link at the upper corner of my screen in that card is a way of, it's just a QR code to a policy statement by DREDF and Cal State East Bay that basically says, yeah, supported decision making is a thing. It's seen as an ADA accommodation, right? And so that perspective gives it a little more teeth, right? And gets people to listen to it. You might have your supporters, my friend, right? My dad, and specifically what those things are. And this idea was actually given to me. We worked with twin girls who turned 18, who both have are in the ASD spectrum. And they thought of this idea. They said, I want somebody to give something to. And they thought and designed this card for us, right? So that was really exciting because this came from them. This is something that they used, right, when they were giving people an idea of what they needed in that specific circumstance. So you've started, you have to be 18, right? And one of the places that you might want to think about using SDM, and one of the easier places to use SDM, is in education. And it's always important to remember, and I'm sure because this is a transitioning group of people, everyone knows decision-making rights, not just educational decision-making rights, but all decision-making rights revert to that person at 18 years of age unless they've been conserved, right? It's really important that people know that, and this should have been a discussion that they've had. And in my mind, and we actually have a whole training on this, decision-making should have been woven into the entire IEP from the time the child started, which could be way back when they're 3 years old, right, until the current day. It shouldn't be a sudden thing that says, oh, hey, you're 18. By the way, you're going to make your own decisions now. That's a recipe for failure, right? And that's what many of us have done. But what I say to people is there's always a place to go from where that person is now. There's always a path to increase it, whether that person is 3 years old, 18 years old, or 26 years old. They can think about how do they start to make decisions. But what's wrong is to expect people to not make any decisions before the age of 18, and then suddenly at 18 to have all those decisions on their plate. That's overwhelming. And you can see why both some people with disabilities and some family members say, hey, we're going to do a conservatorship because this is ridiculous, right? Especially since in school, a lot of the IEP goals that we've had all during these years have not been about us being independent and making decisions. These IEP goals have been about compliance, right? What you're going to do. And if you didn't do it, that was you failing to meet that goal. And so we've trained our kids to actually not be decision makers in many cases. So we really want to think about how do we help them move past that, right? There is this manual for special education. I know you're going to get the slides. So this is just another thing you can look at that can talk about this idea if you are interested. As I said, you don't want to have these skills just pop in, right, and appear. And they should be something that you should be thinking about for your young children, for your older children, for everybody, because decision-making is a learned skill. It's not something that people just pop into, right? It is an increase of the ability to think analytically, to plan ahead, to decide what risks are acceptable, to figure out ways of protecting yourself in case things don't go the way you want them to. There are a million skills that can be, that are practical, pragmatic, educational skills that can be put into your IEPs. The example here is just that the District of Columbia uses them. This has been done developmentally from them. They actually have them from preschool on. I've been trying to get a hold of their curriculum. I've gotten parts of it, but not all of it. But the idea is that this is, again, something that we've done all along, right? What I most of the time hear, right, is, oh, well, have people advocate at their IEP. That's a place where they can start making decision making. IEPs are scary to all of us, right? I mean, there's a lot of people sitting there saying bad things about you, and this is where you're going to start making decisions. I don't think so, right? So it's important to think about things like these kind of goals in their IEPs, that they voice their needs, that they gain confidence to communicate. This is something I've put in a lot of IEPs for students I've worked with, that after about 12 years of age, they start to talk to the teachers about what they need rather than the teachers just reading the IEP. And eventually they engage more and become a lifelong advocate, but don't just ask somebody to suddenly, at 16 years of age, okay, you're an advocate, right? Most of the time I work this in from when kids are 10 or 12 years old, right? And we start bringing them into the process in the same way that you would bring somebody into the IPP process if they haven't done it before, right? You don't dump them in the deep end. You make sure that people have the support they need to get there. What I do here is that school staff often advise and recommend conservatorship as the only choice because that is the situation. They have not ever really worked on decision making for this person. And we suddenly get this idea that decision making is the place to go. There are online trainings for school staff that you can suggest to them. But I know that we've recently just trained people at Oakland Unified because the school staff were unaware of this option, right? And so, of course, they would recommend their only thing they did know, which is conservatorship, right? And again, with conservatorship, it's more permanent. It's harder to get out of. It's a taking away of somebody's decision-making authority in a permanent and legal way. And that may not be what you're looking for. And so that we don't want teachers to be just recommending that. So educate your teachers, right? Give them this information. Make sure they understand that this might be something that your family is looking for. Healthcare, as with finance, is one of the trickier places to use SDM because healthcare is complex. There's a lot of rules around HIPAA that people are worried about, and there's a lot of liability worries that people have who are providers. So it's really important to think through these ideas in healthcare and to build a plan with your team because of those things, because they have those fears. That being said, healthcare is also one of the places where they are more used to people making decisions as a group or together, because that's often how people who are ill make their decisions. They work with their family, they work with their children, they work with their friends in order to help to get that kind of support. One of the things that I always say is always be concerned about what would happen in any kind of emergency situation. So my adult daughter is neurotypical, but she's over the age of 18, which means that I have no rights to her health care. And I have said to her, it doesn't need to be me. It can be your partner, it can be your best friend. I don't care who it is, but it needs to be somebody who can make that decision making for you, right? Because there may be a time when you are not available to make that for yourself. And there is a kinship law that doctors will go to the next of kin. But I said to my daughter, do you want me to make that decision? If so, then the kinship law works in your favor. If it is your partner, then guess what? They're not going to go to him. They're going to go to me, right? So one of the things you do want to have for healthcare is a backup plan, somebody in place who can make those decisions, because there may be situations where you cannot communicate, right? You might be unconscious, you might be ill, you might need surgery, there might be emergency situations. So this is why it's not an either or, right? Durable power of attorney for healthcare, which is what we're talking about here, or an authorized representative signed up with a healthcare plan in either case, these are the people who can make these decisions for you, but you have to have known about this and made up this, your mind about this earlier on and have it set up rather than in an emergency where maybe you can't communicate. In typical healthcare things, these are all the kinds of things somebody can do to help you. None of these are, these are everybody uses these things. Get insurance information. I know my mother made me do lots of her insurance stuff. Assist with physical tasks, pick up the prescriptions, get a medical history. These are all kinds of things that somebody might be getting help with, right? And these are all kinds of tasks that somebody might be using in supported decision making to get assistance to be able to be effective.
Excuse me, Eileen, I hate to interrupt, but
No, go
we
ahead.
seem to have an issue with the Spanish translation.
Okay.
Gabriel, I think you are muted. Could you please unmute? Thank you. Sorry, Eileen.
Are we okay now?
We are. Thank you.
Okay, good. You gave me a second to get a sip of tea, so that was good. So this is a great book. This is put out by UCSF. It's meant for people who use talkers or devices to talk, but it is an excellent book on how to talk to your physician and how to plan to use this with your doctor or with any of your medical providers, which can be a really powerful way of having this kind of conversation, right, about SDM. At minimum, when we're going to see a new provider, Will and I have built something together that we send to them that says, Will, does SDM, he wants you to focus on him. Please give us a longer than normal appointment because he takes time to process. And we have a whole little set of things that we send out because that way people respect, what he wants and how he's going to do it. And in all of these cases, I am allowed to interpret, the way what he's saying to them, because not everyone can read his communication or understand what he says, but I can. Or I'm allowed to advocate with his permission, right? Those are my two jobs. That's it, right? But other people get different jobs. But these are the ways in which you can think about it and have this really clear to the physician so they have that, they know what's going to happen. We've also talked about the fact to the physician that my son has made me his durable power of attorney for medical, because in the end, if he can't communicate, he wants me to make that decision, right? So these are the things you can do practically, right? Think of ways to ease the process so that people can participate, right? And understand what SDM is, because I'll be honest, a lot of people don't. And second, plan for any emergency so they don't take you by surprise. We talked a little bit about regional centers. The regional centers now explicitly ask how you want to make your decisions, right? So that's a really important thing that should be documented in the IPP. And the IPP is a great place to have that conversation about what the decision-making process should be, as well as how does the person communicate. So all of that is in that new IPP form that came out in January of this year. So if you have somebody who's a client of the regional center, these are things to think about to make sure that they're in there so that people know and are able to communicate with the person. The other thing that I say is if this is an adult who's never developed decision-making skills or doesn't have a circle of support, a group of friends, then these are goals for the IPP guys, right? These are things that are absolutely reasonable to ask for either independent living skills, right? To help people develop these skills for example, for decision-making. It provides training and assistance. What is more important to independence to making decisions, right? So you can definitely ask for it that way. And we just recently, and Alyssa and I were talking about this earlier, we will be, my agency that FRN will be launching a coordinated family service from Regional Center of the East Bay, specifically to help people to navigate how and when to use these companion agreements, and as well as other other ways of not having conservatorship while navigating all these systems. So this can be both something that's discussed in your IPP as well as something that is a goal of your IPP, right? Both possibilities. As I said, finance along with medicine is the other place people get flippy, right? Because this is where people see the most ability to conflicts of interest, right? So there should be proactive steps to prevent real, perceived, or potential conflicts of interest. So there could be a separate role for financial monitoring. So, for example, for my son, he wants a certain amount of money in his wallet every week, which he gets from the bank. Then he decides he's still in the cash economy. He decides what he's going to use it on, and his staff put the receipts in his wallet at the end of the week. My son and my husband reconcile the amount of money spent and the amount of money he had, right? So there's easy ways of financial monitoring. And there are a variety of ways of doing this, which I'll talk a little bit about later on, so that there can be, because this is the place where people feel and worry about their adult being exploited, right? And so this is a place where building barriers to exploitation are somewhat easier than in other places, right? So those are the kind of the realms you can use it in for the regional center, for school, for health, and for finances, right? So what are the things that I've been talking about, those companion agreements I've been talking about? Let's take a couple of minutes to talk about them. And then since there's a huge number of questions, it looks like I will open up for questions after that. What other things are out there, right? And these are these companion documents that I've been talking about. And people find the companion documents a little difficult because there are a lot of them, and the durable power of attorney covers most of it, right? But some places they want very specific documents of their own. There's the authorized representative, and this is for medical, right? For a hospital clinician or an insurer. That's often something that's really easy to set up. Your authorized representative, they can act for you if in your place, they can substitute for you. They can help you when you're sick. Advanced care directive is a very longer term way of doing that, right? And I have a link there to an advanced care directive that was put out by Disability Rights California that you can use if that's something you want to do as, instead. That's a pretty, an advanced care directive, particularly if you can get it notarized, is pretty, I haven't seen anybody complain to me yet that any kind of hospital or medical situation wouldn't take those. There's the representative payee for SSI and SSDI. They're actually very aggressive in getting those. Often, you don't usually have to ask for them, but that's the person who's responsible for reporting on how the money was used. We already talked a little bit about power of attorney, right? Which is a financial or other business decision on the person's behalf. Again, it allows substitution. The difference is people can, the person with a disability can end at any time they want to, right? But a power of attorney is a lot less expensive than a conservatorship, and it's easily changed, right? Because one of the disadvantages of conservatorship is that most parents think that the conservatorship is going to protect their child after they've left this earth, right? And the problem is that a lot of the conservatorships for regional center clients, when the parents leave, are dissolved. In fact, I put a direct question to the director of our regional center and said, over the last 5 or 10 years, how many of the conservatorships for regional center clients did you maintain after the parent passed away? And there was nobody else listed on the conservatorship. And the regional center director said less than the count of my 2 hands, less than 10. So power of attorney is something that can be easily changed, can easily support somebody else. We have one person who has a church member who's doing it, another, a friend who has the power of attorney. So this is something, again, that's temporary, right? Usually has to be renewed every 5 years, but is much less expensive to get from an attorney if that's what you want to do. Joint bank accounts. This is an easy way of doing things. You can have joint accounts with your family member. It's an easy way of being able to, monitor the funds are used. You can set up alerts. You can set up the maximum that can come out of an account. You can have CalAble and an authorized representative for CalAble, which still allows you to get public benefits like Medicaid or SSI. But the authorized representative is allowed to make the decisions for that beneficiary. So those are two of the financial ones. The special needs trust is another that allows a person with a disability to maintain their eligibility for public benefits while at the same time being able to move forward and have assets that would not be normally allowed for those benefits. We have just a couple more, but what I really want to stress in this is what goes into that agreement, what areas you want to make a decision on is completely up to you, right? Completely up to the person with a disability. So the decision of, I don't want to make decisions about this is also okay, right? You don't have to be a completely independent decision maker, nor do you have to be a completely dependent decision maker. There's lots of choices. And so those are the places that you can make your decision. You can figure out what works for you. And that's the beauty and the worrisome part of SDM, is that people find it wonderfully flexible and scarily flexible at the same time. I have put up a couple of resources here if you want them, that are just kind of basic things of the things that we've been over. This third one for SCDD is a huge amount of resources from the 4 or 5 projects that I've run over the last 18 months that can give you a lot of information about it. But it is definitely something that is available for adults with disabilities. It is a way of them taking control of their own life and still being able to get the help that the rest of us get without it being seen in a negative way. And with that, I will open to questions.
Well, thank you so much, Eileen. I've seen more than my share of presentations on supported decision making, but I have to say this is very accessible and understandable, and we really appreciate and your teaching skills are definitely were definitely showing tonight. So thank you
Thank
very,
you.
very much.
I'm glad.
I just want to address folks' attention to the chat where I have put in the links to an English evaluation and a Spanish evaluation. Again, 4 very simple questions. If you could just click on those, I like to get at least, 75% participation the night we have the event, because after that, all bets are off.
Everyone
So,
forgets.
yes. So we do have a few questions. We had a very active chat there for a while, but
Yeah, I saw. I was like,
but
okay.
no questions there. Everybody was
Okay,
really good
that's
about the
fine.
questions in the Q&A. So someone would like to know, how do we plan for supported decision making in the event of a sudden death of the supporters or supporter, especially if there are no relatives nearby?
And that's a really good point, right? And so, this is, I think all of us who are parents of adults with disabilities worry about the fragility of our lives, right? If something would happen to us, or the supporters are that our children or adult children use, what would happen? And so I would probably be pushing to think about developing a circle of friends, and I would be asking for that as part of my independent living skills. Because honestly, you can't force that, you can't legislate that, but you can learn it, right? You can learn to do those things. And I will be honest, now that my son just left for the evening, he was here for dinner, but he does not allow me to be a decision-making supporter. I'm allowed to be an advocate. I'm allowed to be a communicator. I'm allowed to make decisions when he's ill. But when I asked, he chose 2 of his support team to be his supporters, not me. right? And I said, yay, good for you,
Yeah,
right? And I said,
appropriate.
but what's wrong with me, right? And he said, too pushy, too pushy, too
Oh,
pushy on the talker, right? So that's one of my favorite stories here. So, and people are complimented usually to do that, especially when they realize what they're being asked to do is help somebody think things through, communicate, and be ethical and not pushing their own decision on them. They're usually pretty complimented to be asked to do it. And two of the people he's worked with for about 8 years now have been more than pleased to be his supporters. And they inform me of what I get to advocate for.
so it's so beneficial to have that trusted circle of support.
It is, but it is something you have to learn to develop. And so again, this is what you ask Regional Center for. This is what you ask for ILS for. You don't just say, oh, we don't have it, right? Because there is no miracle. I wish
There's
there was, right?
there's work.
So there's a lot of work, but I think that many of us underuse the things Regional Center could do for our families, especially for our adults.
Very true. Um, Someone else is asking, what happens if we already have a conservatorship?
If you already have a conservatorship, 1663 made it easier to get out of a conservatorship. And I have quite a few friends who have made the decision to have a conservatorship for their adults with disabilities, and they've asked me a similar question. And I said, on a very simple level, you can do the reverse. You can say you're making decisions about A, B, and C. You can see how they do. You can help them make more complex and more risky decisions over time, right? You and your adult child with disability can decide maybe the conservatorship needs to stay in place, maybe it doesn't, right? But there's no reason not to allow that kind of independence. And I know people who have conservatorships because they just say, Eileen, you have 4 companion agreements that exist for your son. That's too complicated for me. I don't want that, right? So there's a lot of things that can go into this, but what I don't want to say is conservatorship is evil. I just think that if somebody wants to make decisions, it's great to build the opportunities to do so, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And I will preface that with the fact that I grew up in the United States. I am American, and this is part of my culture. This is not part of everybody's culture. In some cultures, adult children don't make decisions. They're made by elders, or they're made by the family collective, or they're made by somebody else. And that might be what feels natural to people. So we don't tell people what to do. We let people figure it out. But there's flexibility within everything. It's just with conservatorship, the difference is that you have to go through a legal process to end it, right? Which if you have a written SDMA, as supported decision-making agreement, is supposed to be easier than it was in the past. Though the person I talked to from the ACU, the American Civil Liberties Union, told me that it really hasn't changed that much yet.
Okay. Some help with this question. Do you have any suggestions for navigating supported decision making for romantic relationships and the worry of undue influence in such relationships?
Well, guess what? The one power that they usually won't give you in a conservatorship is romantic relationships and control over romantic relationships. That's usually the one that they will not give you in a conservatorship. And so, part of this is, and as I said, we have a whole training that, undue influence of people in general is something that people worry about, particularly as you're developing these skills. I mean, I think that the problem is, again, that we shy away from, these kind of issues for we might shy away with for all our children. We definitely shy away for our children with disabilities. And so there's no instruction, there's no thinking about this, there's no doing these things. But I think the idea of conservatorship as protection, people think you can't get arrested. People think you can't get convicted of things. You can't go to jail. You can't get swindled. You can't get caught into some kind of, scheme where within a romantic relationship. All those things can happen in conservatorship. One of my favorite pieces out there was believe it or not, Mississippi did this before we did. Mississippi friends did this before we did. And I watched a video that was done by two teachers, and the alcoholic beverage stores are called ABC stores there. And they said, honey, when a child comes into the ABC store, no one says, hey, are you conserved? They ask for their ID and then they sell them stuff, right? In the same way, you go to buy drugs on the street, no one's asking you, are you conserved? So there's a big difference between some you needs 24/7 and their protection, and the others. And I mean, I worry about these kinds of things myself. I worry about people taking advantage because, my son is a people pleaser, right? So, I definitely worry about those kind of things. So how do we teach them? And what I do is, for me, I say, well, if it was my daughter, what would I try to teach? Right. And then I try to replicate it as best I can. But there is, again, no magic answer for it. There are people who are not ethical and take advantage of people. Right. But conservatorship is not necessarily going to stop that from happening.
What about the example that someone gives here is that their son has turned 18 or will turn 18, and then it would be up to him to apply for SSI. And what if he doesn't want to do it? Like, how do you help them, guide them toward making decisions that you know are in their best interest?
And that's really important. So one of the things I will say is get the birth certificate. If you don't have an original, get a birth certificate before the person turns 18. Just get the birth certificate. Because a lot of us don't have a original one, and it can be a problem. Then if he doesn't agree, there's not much you can do about it, right? If he does agree, he can, do a durable power of attorney and allow you to do it for him, or a permission to exchange information and allow you to help him. I know, and I don't know if where you live, but we do help families who are in these specific circumstances. We've helped about 25 of them this year, right? So, and again, helping to explain that if he wants to have the money, and in some families, this money helps support the whole family, just not him, right? If they need this money, then we need to explain to him why he needs it. Now, if he can't understand that, and, he's not going to act in his own best interest, that is when you start to, move up toward more substitution, right? So that's where, you have to start to think about these sorts of things, which is why I'm saying there's no one right answer. But generally, we want humans to be able to make their own decisions whenever possible.
But there's, I just want to direct folks again, their attention to the chat with the links to the evaluations. We're about halfway there. So if you could just click on those as we roll into the last few questions here. And so obviously, as you said, even if there's a written SDM agreement, it doesn't get filed with a court. It's not a legal agreement. It can be revoked at any time.
Yep.
How often do you think the agreement should be reviewed? And how often should the circle of supporters potentially be
well,
reviewed?
we meet with his circle of supporters on a quarterly basis just to review what's going on and who's been helping him and what's coming up to be helped with and who he's going to want to support him. I believe that for the most part, if 2 to 5 years is when things change, but you have to be thoughtful about this. Even if you have an SDMA agreement, it doesn't bind you. So we could walk into a emergency situation, say I got hit by a car on the street, I could name the person who's with me that day to help me, right? That's absolutely okay. So it's not that limiting. That is where, durable power of attorney is more limiting. Just this person can help you. So it's, I am a person who plans for emergencies and who plans for the long term. So I always check in, and I also remind people, because the people that my son chose as supporters are in their 20s, as he is, right? And I say, so you remember this, right? You remember you're going to be going to this with him. And here's some stuff for the three of you to read. Which
There's
they
that
may or
pushiness again.
yeah, you know why I got the label, right? You know why I got kicked out of the circle of support, right? But
Um,
so I think that that is just kind of and again, it builds structure into somebody's life, and it helps them think. And they might think that, after making some decisions, well, I don't really need help with this anymore, but I do want to maybe try that.
mm,
That's
and
how we all learned, right?
right, yeah. And just to confirm, for durable power of attorney, you don't need an attorney, correct? You
No,
just
you don't
need to
necessarily need
notarize.
it. There's usually need it notarized. There's lots of them on the internet,
Yeah. Okay.
if people want to do that. And I know there are people who do it that way, and there are people who do it with an attorney. So again, this is your comfort level, right? I'm not an attorney. I am a, you know, I am an advocate. I am not an attorney, so I don't give legal advice.
Mhm. Okay. And since it's 7:29, I just think that this might be a nice question to end on. Some folks are encountering skepticism and roadblocks in accessing services because they don't have a conservatorship for their
Yep,
son.
yep.
Any wise words as we close tonight's presentation?
Well, and I think that where people are getting the most roadblocks is with federal agencies, with SSI and with voc rehab. Just putting it out there.
Hmm.
With California, if you showed them that piece of paper, right, that had, and I literally laminated that little piece of paper from DREDF and Cal State East Bay, and I show it to people, right, and that often will help. Having something that's notarized will often help. Having companion agreements will often help. As I said, I've been doing this for a long time. We have a financial power of attorney, durable medical power of attorney, and we also have authorized representative for insurance. That being said, those are for emergency situations, but I do have them set up because I do get that pushback, right? And I, especially in the bank, right? They look at somebody who has cerebral palsy with cerebral palsy, and they think the body and the mind are together.
Mm.
And they think, oh, this person can't make decisions, right? And again, some of the things I do, I say, I'm sorry, he uses SDM and this is an ADA accommodation, and you're not accommodating him. Can I please talk to your manager? And
Okay.
then suddenly the attitude tends to change.
So that's what Eileen Crumb is about, changing attitudes and changing behaviors. And we're very grateful that she's dedicated her life to helping us do that. So
Well,
thank you, Eileen, for your presentation this evening. I think that everybody learned a lot, including myself. And thank you, Gabriel, for your interpretation. And thank all of you for coming.